All right, well, thank you everyone so much for attending. Hello, this is the event Moving and Living Abroad, Tips from American Immigrants or Expats. Today's panelists, Alicia, Kara, Christy, and Sally, they're joining us from around Europe. I'm gonna let them share, precisely where they're joining us from. But thank you so much to all the panelists for being here. I think it's gonna be a great event. I have just a couple of notes before we start, which are the format of this event. It's going to be the first 90 minutes. We're going to talk about 5 big topics. So visas and moving, employment, housing, healthcare, and finances are going to be the 5 we're going to really try to hit on during this big 90-minute block. We'll try to get to transportation and childcare too, maybe if we have time, but I suspect we won't have time. And then the last half hour is going to be the dedicated Q&A time. So if you have questions while we're discussing these topics, please throw them into the Q&A and not into the chat so that I can keep track of them. And you should have a Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. Yeah, I think that's what I've got to say. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone again. Let's get started. We'll just start with introductions. So, share a little bit about yourself, where you are, how you came to be abroad, anything else you want to say. And Alicia, why don't we start with you, because you're at the top of my screen.
Oh, great. So hi, I'm Alicia. I am originally from Olathe, Kansas, and I'm now living in Northern England. I moved here in 2012 with my British husband and my children. So nice to meet you all and look forward to your questions.
And next,
let's just pick.
Yeah, let's just, you can just, why don't we go alphabetical? So we'll do Alicia,
okay.
Kara, Christy, Sally, okay?
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Kara. I'm calling in today from Munich, Germany. I've lived here since the summer of 2012, and I moved here right after college. I'm from Overland Park, Kansas originally, and yeah, went to college in the States, and then right after I graduated, wanted to move to Germany. So I did, and that was inspired a little bit by a few exchange programs, an exchange program I did in high school, and then a study abroad during college, which didn't scratch the itch, made the itch bigger actually. So then after I graduated, decided to move abroad and worked here first as an au pair, then also an English teacher. And then for the past 6 years or so, I've been working in business. At Wrigley, the chewing gum company, and then for the last 3 years at Dannon, the yogurt company there. So yeah, very happy to be a part of this today. Thanks.
And I am Christy. I'm Christy Sanchez. I guess my name only shows up as Christy. Sorry there. Those of you in Lawrence, Kansas might remember me as Christy Yascott. I used to be a manager over at Liberty Hall Theater. So you probably haven't seen my face for a while because in 1998, I moved to Japan for 4 years. Then I was back in Chicago for a little while doing some big corporate, regular old work before jumping off a bridge and moving to France, because I guess for me, it's not even as practical as some of the other stories. I kind of, I ended up falling in love with a hunky French guy. Don't fall for it, ladies. Don't fall for it. It's not as easy as you might think. So in 2005, I moved to France, not really expecting it to still be here 16 years later, but I am now, I like to say I have a 3-ring circus going on. I am working, like, you come here, I had to figure out what kind of work I would do. So I work out of a home office because we're living in the countryside. I'm a 3-ring circus. The biggest one is probably that my husband and I are renovating an old farmhouse. So we're out in the countryside in an old house that had no electricity or water or sewage when we got here. So we've been really putting the elbow grease into getting this house up and running. And because of that, I'm also working at home. So I had to kind of figure out how to work here and how to make a little bit of money. So I have a home office and I do communications. I was doing recruiting, and now I really, I help businesses with their communications, especially multilingual businesses, kind of getting their brand voice strong. And I've segued into copywriting over the past year. And then the third ring in my third ring circus is I have started a nonprofit called the Bee Sanctuary, which kind of sprung out of our renovating our house here in the countryside. And I started taking care of bees really by accident. And we now have a new nonprofit. We are creating a safe place for bees, biodiversity, the Bee Sanctuary. We've got, you know, bees, birds, bugs, butterflies, and biodiversity. So that is up and running. It's kind of a new thing. So today I will not be giving any advice on how you can start a nonprofit organization in France, but next year I might be able to give some advice as I'm swimming in that right now. So I am here in France for 16 years, and I'm really happy to be a part of this, and look forward to, I don't know, inspiring dreams or answering questions. And off to Sally.
Well, hi, everyone. So my husband of 35 years died 3.5 years ago, and my children are raised, and I decided I could live anywhere in the world I wanted to. And so I moved from Bozeman, Montana to Amsterdam. I officially moved here 3 days before the lockdown of COVID, knowing no one in Amsterdam. And then over the last summer, when Europe started allowing people within Europe to move around, I went to Italy and reconnected with Cortona, Italy, and bought a second home in Cortona. So I just returned to Amsterdam yesterday after spending 6 months in Cortona. I went there to do the olive harvest for 2 weeks in October and stayed for 6 months. I'm a cookbook author. I have a cookbook called Just Cook with Sally that is up. It's one of 3 finalists for the Independent Book Publishers Association Cookbook of the Year for 2020. And I do food blogging, and then I pair food with wine for Molancini Wine Club in Italy, which has a couple of thousand members worldwide, and I come up with all the recipes to go with their wines. And that's kind of what I'm doing. It's a great life, but it has taken a lot of moving pieces, figuring out how to negotiate and navigate in 2 different countries with no business or significant other to help me. So I've learned a lot.
Sally, your story amazes me. I think it's fantastic. Arriving here with COVID, I've been thinking that since I met you a week ago. It's really, you're very brave. and I think you're doing such a great job.
It's been interesting. I mean, COVID's kind of a bully, and it's startling to be back in Amsterdam where nobody wears a mask, and very few people have been vaccinated. Coming out of Italy, where if you walked outside in Italy without a mask on, the Italians would surround you and start screaming at you. So I think that's something everyone needs to know in Europe, is that every country really does have a personality, and the personality and the culture, it goes from the food to the politics to the requirements of living there, of visas and residency, banking laws.
Yeah.
Every country's different. It's not just, it is one EU and the money's the same, but you really need to pick your country because that's the culture you like.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think that moving abroad, you know, in itself is always pretty brave. So let's jump into the bureaucracy part. We're going to start by talking about visas and moving. And I don't know if bundling them really makes sense, but so the question is, you know, what visas have you been on? What's been your experience with getting those visas? And then how did you move? Like, did you have to move a lot of stuff? Did you have to move pets? Did you have to move a family? And let's start with Kara this time, and then we'll cycle through in that same alphabetic order. Okay.
Yeah. Sure. So yeah, as I mentioned, I moved to Germany right after I graduated from college. So I was in that way a pretty simple move because it was just me and two suitcases and a backpack in that sense. But I started on an au pair visa. And that's a special kind of visa, at least in Germany, where you're basically living with a host family and you're kind of a nanny, but also it's a thought to be also a cultural exchange program as well. So there's certain parameters on that visa and rules about how much you can work and everything like that. So that was the first visa that I applied for. There are also some age restrictions on au pairs because it's again meant to be this kind of cultural exchange for younger people going to different countries. So that would be definitely something to check into if that would be something you're interested in. And then after my time as an au pair, as I said, I started working as an English teacher. And actually, I didn't necessarily want to work as an English teacher. I studied international business and German when I was in college. So when I came to Germany, I thought, okay, I'll start as an au pair and then I'll figure it out. And then at some point I'll get a job in business and in some industry. So that was my goal. But I found out that in Germany, and I think in many EU countries, I'm not as familiar with the details in the other countries, but at least in Germany, for the first 2 years that you're on a working visa, they want to have a special justification for you to do that job over a German. So being fresh out of school, I didn't have like a super special qualification that would justify me having a entry-level business job over a German. So that's why I found the way to, okay, if I'm an English teacher, my special skill, my special qualification that justifies this visa for me is the fact that I'm a native English speaker. So that's kind of what led me into the English teaching route. And I did that for about 2 years. And then I learned that restriction of needing some sort of special reason to get a job over a German is really only valid for the first 2 years that you're working there. So once you've kind of proven yourself, so to say, you've paid into the tax system, you've been on good behavior on your work visa, so to say, then it opens up for you, and then you can then you have less restrictions in terms of the types of jobs that you can take. So then at that point, I was able to move over to not a different type of visa. It was still a normal working visa. The process was pretty similar, but it wasn't as limited. So I could go for different types of jobs and had less restrictions in that way. And then, but when I had that visa, usually you would renew every 2 to 3 years. So it would just depend on how long they would grant that for you. Some of it also has to do with if your passport is expiring, they're not going to give you a visa for longer than you have a valid passport. So you need to look out for that renewal date as well. And then now what I'm on is an unlimited visa. So I have my permanent residency in Germany now, which I needed to, which I finally got after 5 years of good behavior on my work visa and certain kind of qualifications that you have to get to be able to qualify for that permanent residency. So that's it, my visa story. I am very familiar with the German visa office. I had to go there a lot of times over the years. But it does get easier as you figure it out, and also kind of having a network of friends and other international people who have gone through the same thing, and you can kind of exchange tips and tricks that really helps as well. I think Christy, now it's on to you, right?
Oh, okay. So I have less, like, you have fantastic details. For me, I have two situations. So one, I lived in Japan for 4 years ago. And in that situation, I was I was part of the JET program. So I actually applied to a program that totally took care of everything. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to go in that program, was that it facilitated everything, my visa, my apartment, everything. I just sort of walked into it like a princess. When I came to France, I'll admit I was not organized. I am definitely a by the seat of my pants traveler, a bit of a seat of my pants move to Francer, I guess. I came here and I was just on the touristy visa. Like I would just hop around a little bit, and I honestly didn't really care. Just whatever. I mean, who's really going to bother me? I never actually did anything illegal, but I wasn't really that concerned about it. And then my husband, we were engaged, we got married. And so, we just getting married, that was a lot of paperwork. But I was already pregnant and I was so tired that honestly, my husband took care of all of the French side of the paperwork at that time, of the papers for getting married and all of those kind of things. So I'll admit I was a little fuzzy headed for some of those details, but I think the lesson to learn is, and I think that this is going to come up a lot, each situation is different. So each country has kind of some different parameters. Each personal situation, are you coming here as a student? I was here and I was actually married, but then I still had to go through the paperwork to get the right visa to actually apply for the next, the paperwork in France has to be perfect. Whereas in the United States, it might be a little less. So for me, the visa situation was kind of, even though I was already married and they couldn't deny me a visa, I actually was obligated to fly back to the United States to get the right stamp on my passport that has to be done outside of France, even though I was living here. And so my personal story was a bit ridiculous, but I guess you just have to roll with it. I think anyone out there who's thinking about maybe living abroad, do your research, like Sally said, pick your country, do your research, find out ahead of time, and then just be ready to roll with the what, I have to do what. Even though my husband and I were married, we had all of the paperwork, and for the first 3 years in France, you can only apply for the paperwork for 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. And the police actually came to sort of like in that movie Green Card, they showed up to just check us out and make sure that we were really, I guess, that we liked each other. I don't really know. I don't know what, they came to sort of scope out if we were really married. I thought, well, what were they looking for? I don't know what they would find that would say you can't have your visa. Because we were married, right? So anyways, I think that the visa situation, like I said, I am a fly by the seat of my pants gal, and I managed to work it out. So I think, eyes open, people, check out what you need to do. Yeah, that's my situation, a little bit loosey-goosey. Sally she is going to have better information because she's doing this right now. So she's going to, thank you, Sally, take it over.
Well, I knew that I wanted to move to Amsterdam. And so I came here a year before I actually moved here, and I hired an immigration lawyer. And the immigration lawyer was very much worth the money that I spent, because he laid out an entire system. And in Holland, you could come here under the Dutch-American Friendship Treaty, which dates back to 1958, where you can move to Holland as a freelancer and get a visa, a residency for 2 years to be here, and then get it renewed again. But when you do that, the thing to keep in mind is taxes, that as an American, no matter where you live in the world, you have to pay American taxes. And so the country that you're moving to, they all have different ways that they tax as well. If you come to Holland and under the Dutch-American Friendship Treaty, the Dutch government taxes all of your income, but then they also tax your worldwide net worth. And that means your 401k plan gets taxed, and they don't have such a thing as trust funds or that kind of stuff. Anything and everything is taxable. So my immigration lawyer said, you need to set up your own business in Holland, and you need to set it up before you move here. And then the business has to employ you and send you a formal letter of employment, and you have to have an employment contract. So I set up a Dutch publishing company for my cookbook and employed myself. And when I moved here, I was then able to get a 2-year residency. I'm a Dutch resident. Because I have a business that I'm working for that is a Dutch business, I get a special tax break. But more importantly, I was able to turn in my American driver's license for a Dutch driver's license without having to take the absolute impossible to pass Dutch driving test that just about anyone from America who tries to get a Dutch driver's license, it takes almost a year of their life of going to schools and classes and taking tests and spending like 5,000 euros just to get a friggin' driver's license. So my advice is, whatever country you're going to, hire an immigration lawyer. You know, I mean, it's like you can hire them for 1 hour to just go in and tell you exactly what the laws are at that time, so you know what you're getting into. And if there's a way to go around it, like I did with setting up a Dutch business.
Sally, we did have a couple of questions about the immigration lawyers. Someone was asking, did you hire an American or a Dutch immigration lawyer? And then if you're comfortable sharing, someone asked how much it costs you to hire the immigration lawyer.
I hired a Dutch immigration lawyer that came very highly recommended by a number of Americans who had used this lawyer. And because it ended up being, at first I thought I was just going to do the Dutch-American Friendship Treaty, the DAFT thing. And then I changed course and went to setting up a business. So he had to do a lot more work than what was first anticipated. In the end, it cost me about $1,200, but it was money very well worth it. I think you could go in and hire someone for an hour of contact. I mean, he filed all the papers. He set up appointments, like you had to go in to meet in offices with people and do the appointments. Well, Holland is very, very happy about their language, even though everybody speaks English. Absolutely anything from the government comes to you in Dutch and is not translated. And when you call any place, it's all in Dutch, and there's not a little press 2 for English. It's just in Dutch. And so he handled every one of the meetings and setting up the appointments. And because of his relationships, he was able to get things done in a much faster time frame than it would normally have taken. So it's well worth it.
Yeah, sounds like it. Okay, Alicia.
Yep. So for my experience, I was already married to my husband before we left the States. So a little bit like what Christy was saying, basically, as long as you can meet the requirements and tick those boxes to show that you're legitimately married, which is always a really weird experience anyways. How do you quantify a relationship? So it was really straightforward for us. I mean, we did the paperwork ourselves, you know, as others said, you can use an attorney if you do, but ours was really pretty straightforward. And I will say in my experience of being here that for the years, the requirements have just gotten stricter on immigration. So it gets a little bit more and more difficult. It's a little bit more that you have to prove, and the costs just keep going up and up. So definitely keep that in mind, you know, if you're researching and you think you want to move now, and if you don't for 2 years, then look and see, has anything changed in that time? Also, in my experience, my children are also dual citizens. So they were born in the States. And when we made the decision that we were going to move, all that we needed to do for them was to first we got their American passports to obviously prove their American citizenship. But then all we had to do was just send off for their British passports. You know, again, just using, I think it was my husband's either passport or remember now, but super straightforward. Came back to us a couple of weeks later in the post. And so I was the only one who needed a visa, which obviously that was a lot cheaper, seeing as, you know, having to only pay visa for one instead of for all of us to move over was quite easy. So that was really a very straightforward experience. And for me, again, we moved in 2012. And so that was still when we were recovering from the recession, of course. I was living in Las Vegas and our housing market there was hit quite bad. So we actually made the decision to hold on to our house and not sell it. We actually just used a management company to rent out our house in our absence. We were kind of just trying to wait for the housing market to restabilize a little bit before we decided to sell our house there and buy here. So again, it was really, that was a pretty straightforward process. Even when we came to sell our house later, we did it on the UK side, and we just had to go and find a notary and a solicitor in order to do that paperwork here. But we were able to successfully sell a house and do all that from this side as well. So it was really pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Oh, you keep, the other three of you have used the word visa a lot. I'm a resident, and there is a difference between visas and residency. As a resident, I qualify and have all the EU medical care, and you know, I'm a Dutch citizen. I'm a Dutch resident.
Yeah.
So I can
Yeah.
go and stay in any EU country for as long as I want. If you have a visa, I don't think you can do that, and I don't think you. I mean, there's a point where your visas became residencies, didn't they?
Yeah, so for me, when I was saying I had to go back to the United States, so I was already married here, but I showed up here I just showed up, you know, for that 3 months. I just kept coming and going, and I actually got married just on my regular passport in that first 3-month window you can be here as a tourist. But to ask for a resident status to get my green card equivalent, I have to have the right visa in my passport. And so,
Right.
and I actually, because I'd gotten married, I had to change my passport so it was in my married name, have the stamp in the married name passport before I could even start the process to just ask for my resident card. And what was frustrating,
I know like in Holland, and once again, every country is different, that if you came here, like as an American in Europe, you're only allowed to be in Europe for 90 days, and that's an accumulative amount of time. And then you have to leave for 90 full days before they reset. And now everything is computerized. And so when you check out of the country, if you've been here for more than 90 days without a 90 reset, the laws now are that they will forbid you to come back to Europe for 2.5 years. And then if you come in, and you were doing it before that was instituted, but that's what's happening now. And if you come in, you get a visa. You can get like a 1-year visa, and that's so you can be a student or something. But once you have that visa, you can't apply for residency while you have that visa. You have to leave Europe.
that'll be a country difference, because in France, I had to have the proper visa stamped in the United States before I could start my process to ask for residency here. And what was so frustrating at the time was I was here married and pregnant, and I didn't really want to fly back to the United States. And they couldn't refuse any step of it. Like, so because I was married, they could not refuse my visa. And because I was married and had the visa, they couldn't refuse my residency for that first year. So it was all administrative details. Like, there was no point that they could actually say, no, we're not giving you this visa. I had to do the paperwork. In France, you have to do the paperwork, and you just have to do it the way they want to do it. And that's just the way it is. It's like my doctor.
Yeah, they don't have a sense of humor, and they don't care about your circumstances.
My doctor even
But
said,
you can't get a bank account in Holland. You cannot get a bank account with a visa. You have to have residency.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna get to healthcare, we're gonna get to finances. So let's move to the next topic just so that we can stay a little bit on schedule.
Yeah.
So next one's employment, and we've already talked a bit about this. I know Sally, you already talked a bit about you know, about your publishing company and all of that. But if there's anything you want to add, the questions are like, how do you support yourself in the country where you are? How did you find your job in the first place? I know we already heard about this from Kara too, but you know, if there's anything you want to add. Oh, and someone had a question about remote working too. So if anyone can speak to remote working, that'd be great. And Christy, we're going to start with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So for remote work right now, especially, I mean, one silver lining for this pandemic is that remote working and people being in their offices and connecting around the world is just so comfortable. I mean, it's like, it was always possible before, but now like everyone's just so open to it. So being a, you know, nomad and having your laptop and having an internet connection and finding a way to make money, I think there's just so many ways to do that. I did it really out of force because the way we are living, I really can't, I'm not located where I can easily go to and from work, and my husband's an artisan, so you never know when he's going to be here. And so I basically just figured something out that I could do by using the internet. So there, you just need to get a little bit creative. And this is going to be another thing where each situation in each country is a little bit different. In France, Sarkozy set up something. There is if you have a resident card, so I don't really know how this would work if you're just an American showing up and want to stay here, but there is sort of like a freelance, very small business status where the taxes are basically easy. So I've set myself up as a basically freelance business. My husband has his own business, then I can tell you it's so much more complicated. Like, so it can quickly get complicated to have your own business. But that's, again, do the homework depending on which country you're in. I'm sure there's different levels of complications, but I do think connecting online and working the nomad lifestyle out of your home office is definitely possible.
Okay, and next is Sally in the cycle. Was there anything you wanted to add about?
No, I mean, if someone has a specific question, I'm happy to answer it, but you know, I make money with food. You know, and writing.
I love that.
Cool. Yeah.
That's the dream.
Okay, and Alicia, I think, is next.
Yep. So I didn't mention earlier, I'm also a dual citizen now. So over the years, because I have been here for quite some time, I was able to obtain my dual citizenship. So I am also now a UK citizen. And for me, I mean, I've just worked in just regular kind of business office type of jobs, and it's a different working culture, that's for sure. Again, you kind of have to get used to how things work over here. Again, things like holidays, I mean, as a standard, you get 25 days holiday plus all of our national holidays here. So you end up getting about 6-7 weeks off a year, which is quite nice. I actually work for a global company now that's headquartered in the US. So it's interesting seeing, again, sometimes the US colleagues are like, oh, I can't do this, I can't take holiday. And it's like, oh, everybody in the entire like EU is on holiday in August and September. So nothing's gonna get done over the summertime, definitely. So that is an interesting difference. Again, I can't remember who was mentioning it before, but taxes can get quite complicated. So I actually now have both an accountant that I work with here on the UK side and an accountant that I use to file my taxes on the US side, just because with my employment that I have now in terms of getting like stocks and you know, things like that, I would rather just pay someone to figure it out than to find out later that I have $1,000 tax bill. So for me, it just seems a little bit more straightforward to just make sure that I'm okay on the tax front. But overall, I really haven't found any big differences. Again, you know, this is just kind of a small aside. I'm obviously living in an English-speaking country. But one change that I've had to make over the years is I now use British spelling. And even my friends are like, why are you spelling it that way on Facebook, you weirdo? Like, well, because I work in British business now and I have to spell things the British way. So I don't even know if I remember the American spellings of things anymore, because I've lived here for quite some time. So you'll just kind of, settle into whatever the office culture or the employment culture is in the country. And then you won't remember what it used to be like. So I think is Kara next.
Yeah. Yeah, so I, as I already mentioned, I'm currently working for Denon, and I've been with them for 3 years. And I actually found that job I applied online, just pretty traditional and standard. The thing that helped a lot was that I already had a valid work visa. And because a lot of times, especially if you're looking for jobs from the US, and sometimes they've got these like questions that they ask you to fill out, maybe like an online form kind of thing. And I've seen a lot that even ask you, do you have a valid working visa already? And if you answer no, it's already kind of a criteria to cut you off the list. Because I think, and what I've learned from my experience is that, especially being a non-EU citizen. So I think that's another thing within the EU, because actually my husband is Austrian. He's been living in Germany for about 12 years. And because he's an EU citizen, he doesn't have to do any of the things that I have to do. So it's kind of this, are you EU or non-EU, that makes a difference. And I think, for me, if you're not an EU citizen, you need that extra visa. And companies, if you're not freelancing, so if you're trying to get a job with a company, what really helps is to have that company kind of sponsor you. So, I mean, Christy said before, when she was in Japan, it was this, things were kind of set up for her. So if you get a company on your side that can help you through the process, that's of course really, really great to have. But you can also do things yourself. So when I got my first kind of business job, so when I went from teaching to working for a company, what we did was, because in Germany how it works is and we touched on this a little bit, you've got your residence, you have your residence permit, but then that's linked to your work permit. So you can have different, like people with the same residence permit can have different levels of working permissions, so to say. So and I was still in that time where I hadn't quite hit that 2-year mark that I mentioned previously on my working permission being a little bit more free. So what I did was I went to the visa office because I also had to go there and give them my new job contract. Every time I switched jobs, I needed to inform them what my job was. Until basically I've had to do that until I've gotten my permanent residency, because now I've been here long enough that I guess they don't care anymore. But until I got that, I had to go and inform them every time I changed my job. I had to submit my working contract to them. And then it's called in German, well, it translates to the foreigner's office that handles all the visas. They would actually send that over to the working agency, or the labor ministry, I guess would be the proper name for it. And then they check your contract, and they don't necessarily always approve you. So what I did, because I knew this already from some experience, I proactively asked the company that I was getting the contract for to say, okay, thank you for the contract. This is great. Definitely want to sign and accept. By the way, would you mind including or giving me a letter that says something like, this is why in particular we want to hire you. That job, being an English speaker, was again not a necessity, but definitely an advantage in that job as well. So I asked the company if they wouldn't mind to say, hey, I just need this letter just to be extra sure that that everything will go smoothly with the working ministry, so that they don't even have a question, or they don't even try to deny it for any reason. And so I kind of pre-typed up the letter for them and said, if you can just use this text, or, I mean, of course, feel free to change it, but like, this is kind of what I need. And they were really happy to do that, because I think if you talk to companies and you talk to maybe a recruiter or somebody from an HR department, especially if, like in my case, my German colleagues who work in my HR department, they don't really know much about visas. I mean, similar in the way that as an American, I don't know a lot about the American visa process to be able to advise somebody. So, so they might think, oh, sponsoring someone for a visa is going to be a huge deal, where sometimes it's not. And for me, like just asking them, hey, can you just write me a letter that kind of gives even 1 or 2 bullet points why you want me specifically, just to kind of make sure that process goes smoothly, that would be great. And that's all it was, that in terms of kind of extra work for them. So, so I think it can sound a bit scary sometimes to companies to feel like, oh no, we have to sponsor somebody, but it can be pretty simple. I'm sure it depends on the country, but that was at least my experience. So, and then the other thing I wanted to say was that freelancing in Germany in particular is definitely a different world. So, so I had a lot of working visa. So my previous visas, I was allowed to work, but only for the specific companies that I had been approved for. So again, as I said, I always had to tell the office every time I changed jobs, and they had to know what job I was working in. And at that time, I wasn't allowed to do any freelance work. It specifically said in my visa that, or my residence card, and then there's this kind of extra part that says the specifics of your working permissions. And for me, it said, so Kara is only allowed to work at X company doing X job, not allowed to freelance. So that was also, I mean, I think it's, again, as we said, like if that's the best option for you, there are definitely ways to do it, of course. But it's just making sure to, again, kind of, as we said, do your research on the specific country, and try to figure that out, because freelancing can be, I think, can be easy, maybe depending on the country, and or you might find a workaround like Sally did with kind of creating your own company and hiring yourself. But it just depends on where you are and which country it is. So.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for all that detail, Kara. That was really helpful, I think.
I spent a lot of time at the visa office, so learned a lot over the years. Yeah,
it should. Okay, we're going to switch gears now and touch on something that we haven't gotten to at all yet, except for Christy briefly mentioning the old farmhouse. So housing, we had a couple of questions about, resources for finding housing. So really just, how did you find housing? Have you bought, have you rented? Have you had to find roommates? And then someone was wondering too, is residency required before you buy a house? I wonder if anyone can speak to that. We're going to start with Sally for this one.
Well, in Holland, residency is not required to buy a house, but residency is required to have a bank account. And setting up all your electrical bills and things like that, you kind of need a bank account. So it becomes very kind of tricky. I purchased my house, and it was trying to set up the bank account to be able to purchase the house. It was really like putting together the worst jigsaw puzzle that you've ever seen spread out on a table. Where it was what comes first, the chicken or the egg, and once again, without an immigration lawyer, a tax lawyer, and a business lawyer, I hired all three, and each one of them helped supply definite information of what needed to be done first. And there were a couple of times where I thought I was just going to pull my hair out and scream, but it can be done. The other thing that I have learned is that there are in Italy and in Amsterdam Facebook pages for Americans who live in Amsterdam, Americans who live in Italy. You're supposed to live there to join, but people who are thinking of moving to the countries end up getting in. And then you can post questions, and you can get a lot of really good feedback from people who have, been specifically dealing with the same thing that you've been dealing with. I was able to buy a house in Italy. I'm not a resident of Italy. I was able to set up a bank account in Italy without being a resident. I just had to get a tax number, and that worked out just fine.
Cool. Okay. Alicia.
Yeah, I think that's me next. So yeah, it is really interesting. Like Sally said, it's a little bit of a jigsaw. So one of the things that we found extremely difficult when we first moved here was even just trying to get credit, as several people have said, because I obviously had never lived here. So even though I had 20 years of credit in the US, I had nothing over here. And my husband had lived in the States for about 13 years. So he basically didn't have a credit footprint either. So one of the most challenging experiences I remember when we first moved here was even trying to get a mobile phone. Like, no one would even give us phones because we had no credit. So no one would give us, we had to eventually, I think, go with someone who made us pay for our contract up front, but for 6 months, but that started the credit, right? So it's all so connected. Again, I got quite lucky because my husband had been here, so he had a bank account. So I was able to be added on as a spouse to a joint bank account. So that made it a little bit easier. We also rented for a while before we purchased a house now. So we do own our own house now. In my experience, renting was not a huge issue, but again, just those small changes that were not unexpected, such as having to pay 6 months rent up front. I wasn't expecting that. They did, like, I think, monthly inspections on our property, like the first year that we were there. So again, just small differences that you might not expect that were slightly different. Buying a house, again, the housing is just different here. It's different styles. It's very expensive compared to US prices. So, you end up buying something much smaller over here that costs a lot more. In the UK, they have something that are called chains, which again, who knows in different countries how they do things. But basically, if you enter into a chain, the person whose house you're buying off of is saying that they're not going to move out until their house is ready. And you can get these super complicated chains with, like, you're waiting on someone's house that's like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon away from you. And then it can all fall apart. So don't go with chains. Let me avoid that like the plague, most definitely. Another thing actually that I just thought of, there is a difference in the UK with land. So there's things such as freehold and leasehold properties. So you could end up in a situation where you own your house, but you don't own the land that your house is on. And they could, do anything like raise your lease price on your land. So definitely things like looking into freehold versus leasehold in the UK was something that, we were not expecting. So yeah, just again, do your homework, make sure that you understand what you're getting into. As Sally said, of course, there's Facebook groups here for Americans as well. I found that very, very helpful when I first moved over, and you could just ask questions. What is happening? Why are they talking about this? And what is a chain and all this stuff? So definitely use your local groups to help you answer the questions that you have.
Well, you made me remember something that's, I did high-end real estate in Bozeman for 14 years, and buying a house here, it is not like buying a house in the United States, starting with the fact that people take everything. I mean, you're just buying the shell of the house. They take the light fixtures that are like chandeliers and light fixtures hanging from the ceiling. They take all the appliances. I mean, when you buy a house in the United States, you expect the refrigerator to stay with the house, and they're taking the refrigerator, they're taking light bulbs, taking shelving. I mean, it just, so if you're buying someplace, you really need to go through and find out exactly what you're buying, because what you assume you're buying and what you get might be two different things. Like they take all the curtains, all the, thing. In the United States, if something's attached to the wall, it stays with the house. Here, that is not the case.
Yeah, that's a great point. Kara, I think you're up next.
Yeah, so I think my experience has been pretty simple, because I've been renting the whole time that I've been here. The apartment that we're in now, we also rent. I think we're freshly married, just married last year, so I think buying for us is a little bit down the road still. But yeah, so I think one thing that I would definitely echo is what's been mentioned on this idea of like networks, and these expat networks can be so valuable, whether it's a Facebook group or in Germany, there's also like a website as well, which is called Toy Town Germany. But then also even I've seen lately on like Instagram and stuff like that, there are like expats abroad who are sharing their experiences, and then you can message them, and I mean, okay, depending on who they are, they might not answer, but still, like, there's lots of sharing of experiences going on, and that's really helpful, because people have like you definitely won't be the first one going through something. But I guess, yeah, more specific to housing, like that really helps with looking for apartments, because I think something is, I mean, even just the apartment search itself in Germany is definitely different, where you have to fill out paperwork to even apply for apartments. So they already want to see like a whole sheet of information about you. And there's also like I guess it's kind of the equivalent of like a credit check that most places want. And then if you don't have that, or you don't know how to get it, and you might just disadvantage yourself in terms of being selected for an apartment. But again, it very much depends on the country and the city that you're in. Yeah, and then the last thing is what Sally said about people taking everything with them is definitely true. Even in rentals, so in Germany, people also take their kitchens with them, even in rental apartments sometimes.
Yeah, they take the kitchens.
Like, yeah, so like if I was looking for an apartment, and you maybe have search criteria, if you find a website with all the apartment listings on it, and then and you don't, I mean, you might see a picture, nice pictures of the kitchen, but then you get there and you view the apartment, they're like, by the way, this kitchen won't be here, or the previous renters bought this kitchen when they moved in. They want to sell it to you for, I don't know, 1,000 euros. So if you want to keep this kitchen, you have to pay them 1,000 euros, or they're going to take it with them, and then you have to buy a new kitchen that then becomes your problem when you move out. So there are differences for sure. And again, kind of these communities or forums, or even your friends, if you can build a network of other expats, can really help kind of clue you into those things.
Wow. My experience is pretty different from those. So here in France, so Alicia was saying how everything was so much more expensive in England. Here, when I first got here in France, I had sort of sticker shock on how cheap things were. And so like I was actually looking for houses, and for anybody out there, I just want you to know, like, I came here basically, I mean, I had money in the bank, but we basically were flying on broke for the first 7 years of our marriage. In fact, like, so when I first came here, even though it took a while for the paperwork to go through for me to be able to work, but then I had a baby and my husband was doing this weird job, and tax-wise, it was actually better for me to not work. Weird. That was a weird thing that if I were to go back, I might handle it differently. But we were basically renting a house out in the countryside. It was really cheap. And eventually we were looking for a house to buy. And, we bought our house here. It's on 2,000 square meters of land, gorgeous views, big old house, 100,000 euros. So I think in the United States, you probably can't get an apartment for what we bought our house for. So for those of you out there who might be like, trying to do this on the cheap and you're getting freaked out by everyone talking about hiring lawyers, although now I do think that an immigration lawyer is probably a good idea. France, in my experience, buying a house out in the countryside, this is again what I said, where you go. And in France,
it's not cheap in Paris.
Yeah, if you go in Paris, I like, I don't think it just scares me to even think about it. But outside of Toulouse and it here, like now it took us 7 years to find our property. So but that was just because we didn't have money, right? So we had to find something really cheap. But in the end, for us, buying a house was not that difficult. But I will say, I just have recently heard people having difficulty finding anything to rent. So I guess that I don't have a lot of helpful information on that. But again, do your research before you show up somewhere.
Well, like in Holland, there's a thing called Funda. And Funda is basically like a multiple listing service where everything that you go on and you put in the criteria, what city, the prices, how much neighborhood, how many bedrooms, and all of that, and whether you want to rent or buy. And once you sign up, you get daily postings. So it's sort of like in the United States, if you sign on to one of the real estate sites, and they have one in Italy as well. So I think a lot of these countries now have different sites that will alert you to what's available for rent or for buying.
Yeah, I think so. I just want to reassure everybody in the audience that the questions that are in the Q&A that aren't exactly related to the topics we're talking about, we will get to those. So, stick with us if you can. If not, it's all being recorded, so you can watch it later if you need to. Okay, and so let's move to healthcare. I don't know if anyone has had specific experiences with healthcare that they really want to share the details of, but I wonder if in broad strokes you could talk about insurance, if there are any healthcare requirements when you got your visas or residencies. Christy, if you could talk about being pregnant in France and what that experience is like, that would be great. Yeah, so let's see, who are we starting with this time? I think Alicia, right?
Yeah, I think it's me. So in the UK, we do have nationalized care called CHESS. And when I moved here on my visa, there was no surcharge attached to the visa. But I know now that they do require, I think it's an extra £500 that gets added to your visa price in order to access the NHS while you're here on a residency permit. So again, just search into that yourself to find out. The NHS, it's great, but it is very slow, definitely, compared to some of the experiences that I've had in the UK. I mean, or in the US. Again, even things like my children were born in the States, so when I moved them over, used to, go in for a checkup and taking them in every couple of months or, once a year for an annual health check. No, basically you just go to the doctor here if something's wrong. But generally they don't tend to have as many kind of well checks and things like that I've experienced, at least with my kids and things like that. It's very, very paper-based. I was shocked at how paper-based a lot of government and administration, including healthcare, is here. So prepare for things to take a very, very long time because you have to wait for a letter, a paper referral from your doctor before you can do this. And then once you get that, you have to ring. And it's like, well, but couldn't somebody have just called me instead of making me wait for that letter to arrive? So definitely be aware of just how slow some things can be. Also in the UK, we say that healthcare is free, but you do actually pay for some things. So in the UK, we pay for prescriptions, we pay for things like vision and dental. So that is not a part of the NHS. And so that would need to be something that you would just, again, just go and find a dentist and pay the tiered prices. They are, again, you know, relatively cheaper, I would say, than what you would pay in the US. But that's basically been my experience. I've been lucky. I haven't had any, you know, kind of major health needs while I've been here. Employers sometimes do offer private insurance. So I actually have Bupa through my employer. So you usually find faster service and, you know, quicker referrals and things like that. But we're fiercely protective of our NHS. We don't want to lose it. And I hate to rely too much on private insurance because I don't want to see our NHS taken away from us. So, you know, I think there's a lot of people that are really grateful for the NHS and what it provides to us. So I try not to go private if it's not necessary. So yeah, that's my experiences.
So
And that's Cara, right? Yeah. Cara.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, so yeah, I would say I think my experience is maybe a bit similar to Alicia in the way that like I haven't had any serious health issues since being here, luckily. So in Germany, there's also a universal healthcare system. So everybody has to have health insurance. Also, when I got my first, so when I was an au pair and I was here with the host family and on that special visa, actually my host family was required to have health insurance for me. And then once I had my first kind of, real job, so to say, I had to also then at that time register kind of on my own with the health insurance here. And there are a couple different health insurance companies, but it is that kind of, I guess, public healthcare structure. So so they all offer basically the same kind of thing. So I just picked one and went with that. And yeah, it's been working out. Very well for me. I think, I think it also can be a little bit slower sometimes. So if you're making kind of non-urgent appointments, like a dentist appointment or just a checkup or something like that, calling, you might be waiting a couple weeks, or I've called before sometimes like, oh, I'd like to go to the doctor, and they say, okay, the next appointment's in, I don't know, 3 months from now or something like that, which, okay, for non-urgent things, it's obviously very different if you're talking about just a checkup versus something more serious where obviously you get the care you need. But yeah, so my experience has been really nice, but also pretty simple, I would say. One thing that I noticed that was a difference as well is that in Germany there are not as many out-of-pocket costs, I guess. I would say it like that. So like when you go to the doctor for a checkup, for example, you don't have a copay. And I remember that was an interesting experience when I first went to the doctor here. I was so used to it in the States, like, okay, you go to the doctor and then before you leave, you have to go to the little counter and you have to pay and you have to, and so I went back to the counter and they were like, yeah, what do you need? And I said, okay, like, do I have to pay something? Like, am I done? And she was like, yeah, you're done. You can leave, go. So it's kind of little things like that that were different, but yeah, overall, I'm really happy with the healthcare system here. And there are also nice things like, for example, going to therapy is free. There's no cost to therapy here. And you do have a limit. So I think there's a certain number of like weeks or a certain number of sessions or something like that that's covered. But it's quite a lot. It's like you could be going for years and not pay anything. And yeah, so I think overall it's been a really good experience for me, but also a relatively simple one. So yeah. So over to you, Christy.
Well, here in France, I think overall the system here is it's pretty great. I mean, I think I feel really grateful, especially since I said, we don't have a lot of money. So we don't have really great jobs. In the United States, I did. And I had a good job. I had great health insurance before I came here. My experience here, I've had quite a few things. So, I mean, not only was I pregnant here, when I was first pregnant, we were dealing with the paperwork and I was all freaked out because, you know, in the United States, all of you out there, you know, healthcare is so terrifyingly expensive and you have to always think about it. And especially for women thinking about having a baby, going through a pregnancy, I know that at various places, you know, there's some health insurance companies like tried to avoid providing maternity coverage because it's so expensive. So when I got pregnant here and I didn't really speak French that well, and we weren't really sure about where my paperwork was, and I just thought, oh my gosh, this is going to cost us so much money. And I was really worried. They actually sent a nurse, like a pregnancy specialist, over to our apartment to chat with me. Like, we hear you're pregnant. Like, we found out from your doctor that you're pregnant. Like, we're going to talk to you about like what's going on. And I just thought, oh my gosh, how much does this cost? Like, how much is it going to cost to have a nurse come to my house to talk to me about, like, but she's like, don't relax. It's covered. Like, don't worry about the money, you know? And it really, when I first came here, it really emotionally took me a while to not be thinking like, how much is this going to cost and how am I going to pay for this? And this I don't know if she was a nurse, she was a something, but she was like, she's like, Christy, she was saying, you know, there's people that show up here, you know, that just walk here from Africa and all of their health insurance is everything's taken care of. Just like, you know, don't worry, like you're going to be okay. So the system here overall, I think, yeah, once you're in the system, this is where, you know, because I came here and I married a Frenchman and I have a resident card. I'm not exactly sure what the difference is if an American moves here just as an American and gets a card. So I'm sorry, I can't speak to that difference, but in general, it's just not that expensive here. So like, even if you just had to go to the hospital, and when I was actually in my good job in the United States, I came here to visit, totally not in my married state, ended up in the hospital needing to have surgery. And we were so worried. I was like, how is my American insurance going to cover this? And it was like this big disaster. In the end, the whole thing cost like $1,700 for like being in the hospital for days and having surgery in a French hospital. So even at that, which was like a dramatic situation, wasn't really that expensive. I suppose if I wanted to give advice to people that are thinking of coming to France, one of the things, like I think a useful piece of advice, other than figuring out your own situation, is that here in France, people go to the emergency room. Like in the United States, like we avoid going to the emergency room because they're going to give you that $500 charge for the Band-Aid and then the $800 charge for looking at the Band-Aid. But here, everybody basically starts, like if you don't know what to do, just go to the emergency room at a hospital, and it's just what people do. And it ends up like I took my son to the emergency room last year, and they sent us a bill. We had to see a doctor and a couple other things for his leg. And they sent us a bill of €9. It was €9 to go to the emergency room. And actually our insurance that we happen to have insurance, it covered it. But that would be my advice. Go to the emergency room. Don't be afraid. It's not going to be the $1,000 for, you know, a cup of water or whatever it is. In the United States, it's so terrifying. So I don't know if there's any specific questions. I do know a bit about being in hospitals here. My son has had surgery, and yeah. Or actually, no, I would get, if someone's thinking about coming to France, so the person who was thinking about coming to Paris, coming to France, I would say, one, keep in mind, you can always go to the emergency room. They will take care of you, and it's not going to be that expensive. Also, if you're thinking about coming to France, look into getting your doctor, like get into some office and have your doctor that knows who you are. Because once you're in, then you can always go back to that doctor. I find now people here talking about how doctors fill up their roster and they're not taking any new patients. So that would be one thing that I would recommend. Maybe if you know the area that you're going, maybe research the doctors and just get in with somebody for an appointment so that you're kind of in their collection of patients. That would be my piece of advice for newcomers to France.
Great. Okay, Sally, last one. For
Well, the Dutch system's different. First of all, you have to have a bank account because you can't even buy groceries in a lot of grocery stores without having a bank debit card. So when you sign up for your bank account, they automatically every month take out your healthcare costs. So this is the way they ensure that everyone in Holland is paying for healthcare. You cannot get away without paying for healthcare. And it's universal coverage. And every person in Holland has to register within their municipality as to where they live. And so the government knows where you're living, and then you have healthcare providers within a radius of your house that you need to use one of those healthcare providers, and you need to contact them and see if they're taking any new patients. And then once you register that you're using a specific healthcare provider, you cannot seek any medical care for anything without going through that healthcare provider. So you don't show up at the emergency room. You would be turned away unless you were bleeding out from a gunshot wound, which they don't have guns here, so that wouldn't be happening, but a car accident or something. So you go to your healthcare provider and you have automatically once a year where you can go in to see them. But like I showed up for my first appointment with all of my medical records from the United States, this folder, and I hand it to the woman and I say, well, here's my medical records. She goes, well, I won't be reading those. Do you have anything that I need to know about? And I was like, well, I'm really healthy. And she said, well, good, goodbye. And I said, aren't you going to do a checkup? And she goes, no, you're healthy. Why would I do a checkup? So basically here, they don't prescribe antibiotics. One of the things in the chat rooms before moving here that everybody said was, you need to bring antibiotics with you because the Dutch will not give you antibiotics under any circumstances. They really don't give you any kind of health painkillers. The Dutch have this attitude of suck it up, walk up and down your stairs, go ride your bike, keep yourself healthy. And if you're in pain, we don't want to hear about it. And
if you're in pain, come over to France because all the doctors here are just like, here's medicine, 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 take it all.
Yeah, no, here there's no. And here you can't go to any pharmacy. You have to register with the pharmacy. Wow. So if the doctor prescribes something for you, you can only go to the pharmacy that the doctor has prescribed, that you're registered with that pharmacy. And so they monitor everything. Wow. But that said, I just got a notice that I was to come in to make an appointment with a specialist to go in to do a complete cancer scan to make sure that I didn't have any kind of cancers whatsoever. And it's like a whole body cancer scan.
Wow.
And it's, you reach certain age points and they tell you to come in and have a specific thing done. But otherwise, if you go to the doctor and you have a cold, the doctor's going to say, you've got a cold. Why are you wasting my time? You know, come back in a couple of weeks if you're still sick.
I have something to add. I find that it's so different. So right there, everybody who's listening, like, do your research. Each country is so different. But for those of you, because I know everybody wants to come to France, right? It's so great. But,
are we going to have a voting on this at the end? Come on now.
So another piece of useful information for somebody coming to France, if you're traveling or living here, one, yes, you can just go to the emergency room. I've gone to the emergency room for serious things with my son, but there's people there that, I mean, they just go there for just about anything. So you can go to the emergency room, but also here, pharmacies are very different. So you cannot go into a store and just buy Tylenol. You have to go and actually say to the pharmacist, oh, I would like some ibuprofen, or I would like some, you have to, and they'll be like, really, are you sure? And they talk to you. But in that sense, if you can't go to see a doctor, there's a lot of medication here that if you just go and talk to the pharmacist, there's a lot of stuff that they can actually help you with that. So it might be easier to deal with some healthcare stuff with like, just avoid a doctor, talk to a pharmacist. Here you can go to any pharmacy. There's a big green neon sign. Like if the big neon pharmacy sign is on, that pharmacy is open and they will talk to you about anything. Now be careful if you're talking about something private, they will talk in front of everybody. Like, oh, so you have, some very private itching going on. So beware, but they will help you.
Yeah, and I just, sorry, I wanted to just add one other thing as well that when Sally was talking, it reminded me of this. So thinking about bringing over your medical records and diagnoses, basically sometimes you're starting from scratch. So I have a son who's autistic and he actually was diagnosed over here, not in the US, but I have heard horror stories from people who do have certain, diagnoses that they try and bring over to the NHS, and they're told basically to start from scratch and square one. So again, just do your research and make sure, you might, especially if your condition might require medication, you'll go, oh, here, I have ADHD and I need this prescription. Your GP's like, no, you don't. You don't have that according to the UK records. So just really research that in advance and make sure if you need to bring medication with you to start your journey, then you have that medication that you need. So.
Yeah, that's a great tip. We had a couple of questions in the chat. Can any of you speak to if you're just visiting, Europe for an extended time, like 1 month, they're asking, and you have US health coverage, do you have any idea how the healthcare costs would be covered then if you had to go to the emergency room maybe?
I have no idea.
Yeah, it's okay if not, it's a bit different.
I did do that actually, but yeah, we had, in that situation, it was kind of a mess. But in that situation here in France, it ended up being, it wasn't that expensive. And my company at the time just paid the bill. And I actually had to pay, like I ended up paying that $1,700 for that surgery. And then my company paid me $1,700. Everyone was like, well, let's just not deal with they didn't want to deal with it because they couldn't figure it out.
I know that in the United States that you can like even Blue Cross Blue Shield, that you can contact them and say you're going to be in Europe for a time period and you can buy insurance for that time period. And like in Holland, when I signed up for my health insurance, even though it's this national insurance, you can pay a lower rate for just having it covered in Holland, or you can pay an additional rate, like $20 more a month, and then it's covered worldwide. And so in Italy, my health insurance here in Holland covered everything in Italy. And I actually got my COVID vaccination in Italy, and the health insurance in Italy is excellent. Everybody, all the foreigners in Italy who've been expats there swear by the health insurance or the health coverage in Italy, that it's just, the people are so kind and caring and go to extremes to help you and follow up and everything else. So it is country by country.
Yeah, I got sick in Malaysia. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'd say I got sick in Malaysia, or I was with my boyfriend. We were traveling and he got sick and we were like, oh no. So we actually went, some taxi drivers like, I'll take you to the medical center. And we went to this medical center and we waited and he saw a doctor and we got all this care and they gave him his medicine and they did all this stuff. And at the end, it was less than $2. We were like, oh, okay. We were kind of like, yeah, that's when I lived in Japan. So it was we came from Japan, we're traveling. And so I don't think we were that worried because we had funds, but at the end I was like, really, that's all? I kind of feel like I want to give you $50 to like help somebody else. Cause it was, so that it depends on where you go. Sorry, Kara.
Yeah. No, it's all good. So I have maybe I don't know, two situations that could maybe be helpful. So the first was actually when I was studying abroad. I went to the doctor for a doctor's appointment. So it wasn't an emergency. It wasn't like anything serious. But I just went to the doctor. And because I was a student, I was still under my parents' insurance in the States. And so and I think we had a certain health insurance through the study abroad program, but it was still slightly different than kind of the normal insurance in Germany. So what happened there was that at the end of the appointment, I got a bill, or at least I had to give them an address to send the bill to, because I didn't have the, because I did mention before there aren't co-pays, but if you don't have the normal German insurance, then they would send you a bill. So then yeah, I got a bill that then I paid kind of out of pocket up front, and because it was just a doctor's visit, it wasn't very expensive. And then I sent that bill to the insurance company in the States. So I think it was even Blue Cross Blue Shield, maybe, sent it to them, and then ended up getting reimbursed for, I'm not sure if it was the full amount or maybe just a piece of it. But yeah, that was that experience. It was pretty straightforward, actually. I mean, of course, I did have to pay kind of upfront out of pocket, but at that time it wasn't a huge deal. It wasn't expensive, luckily. And then the second experience I had was kind of similar, but it was, since I was living in here, we were traveling in Thailand, and I did have kind of an accident where I stubbed my toe really bad, and something happened with my toenail. It was very unpleasant. And so we ended up going to a hospital in Thailand, but it was this kind of fancy tourist expat hospital somehow. And again, we just got the bill at the end, and paid up front, but then had the bill. And then actually when we ended up getting back here, thought, okay, we could have filed it with our insurance in Germany and gotten reimbursed, but it was like 14 euros or something. So we were like, I think that's okay. Like, it wasn't worth the effort for us, but of course, if it's something where it's more expensive, then it's obviously worth it. But for us, it was like, okay, I think we can swallow the 14 euros. I think that's fine. So.
I just want to throw something out there, is that if there are people who are thinking about moving and actually relocating to another country, one of the things to keep in mind is, do you still have insurance back in the United States? So when I was back, so I'm here and I've got all my great health coverage, and I've got no coverage in the United States. And so I actually was back in the United States and slipped and fell on the ice in Chicago, holding my baby, who hit his head. It was just this really dramatic situation in a grocery store parking lot with a whole bunch of people coming around. And we had to go to the emergency room. And because he was a baby, they, x-rayed they gave him an MRI to make sure his brain was okay. And in the end, it was, like $2,500 bill. And here our French health coverage was like, we don't deal with the United States. So I'm covered here in France, but France says, no, we'll reimburse you the equivalent of what it would have cost in France, which is like $9, And so in that situation, there are some, so that's something to consider, is that, where your health coverage home is. Just keep it in mind.
Yeah, what a horror story. That sounds sad. Okay, we had one more question about healthcare, and then we gotta do the money part. And then people are really curious about how you chose where you live and what you're, if you knew the language beforehand and that sort of thing. So we'll get to that sort of fun part after we do the money. But first, does anyone have experience with limits on healthcare for older persons in your countries? There's a question about, we read that the UK NHS does not cover knee replacements for persons above age 60 or thereabouts.
Yeah, I wouldn't know. I mean, you would just have to research it specifically. But again, because the NHS, it is quite slow. Some things they do and they don't do, you might have to go private. So yeah, I would just look into any specific requirements like that.
Cool. Okay, so let's do finances now. I'm thinking that finances should have been first actually, because it sounds like finances come before like employment, housing, and
Not for
everything.
me. I just
But okay, all right. But so, we had a bunch of questions about taxes, and we already talked about that a bit. We just had a question about, did you keep your American credit cards? Did you get national debit cards? Did you just use cash? So yeah, so let's talk about, getting a bank account and getting cards. Yeah, all that stuff. Okay. And we're starting with Kara on this one.
Okay. Yeah, so I have three different bank accounts here. And for me, it wasn't difficult to get a bank account, but I needed to show my residence permit to get one. But yeah, otherwise it's pretty straightforward. I do still have one account in the States that I have just because I go back and forth, and I'm still relatively young, trying to figure out my finance situation, so I'm still kind of relatively flexible, and haven't totally figured out the long-term plan in that sense. But yeah, so right now I've got a account in the States and then a couple accounts here. But yeah, it was pretty straightforward to open that. And then I also have a couple of credit cards as well, so like German credit cards that I applied for. And here, when I applied, there was a question specifically about, are you an American and therefore subject to taxes? So this was a very specific question that they asked, no matter who is applying for the card, because yes, there are, you are, I think Sally was the one who said it before, like no matter where you are in the world, you are still subject to American taxes. So that's something that your bank needs to know about you. But in my experience, it hasn't been a huge problem. So yeah, that's kind of my bank account situation. And then for taxes, for me, it's actually also been relatively straightforward and simple, but I don't own property in the States or here. So maybe that's something that has kept it pretty simple for me over the years. And until this past year, I also was single as well, without kids. So yeah, my taxes have been pretty straightforward. In Germany, it's pretty easy to file. And I also paid for someone to do it, thinking that it's definitely worth it to, I think, as Alicia mentioned earlier, like I would rather pay someone to figure it out for me now than later get a bill or some sort of penalty for doing something wrong, especially since it's my second language. And then I also am lucky to have the same setup in the States, where I file every year as well, and I have to, at the end of the year here, I get a statement of all of my income and all the different kinds of taxes that I paid within Germany, and then I just I translate that form into English, so the accountants in the States know what things are, and then they use that to file my taxes in the States. I think as well, in terms of paying, so I haven't had to pay taxes in the States since I've been here. I think there's a limit on, so if you're making over a certain amount, and it's, I don't remember what it is, but then you're subject to double income taxes, which has not been the case for me. I guess for better or for worse, because of course you always want a higher salary, but that comes with a consequence. So yeah, I haven't had to have that double on income taxes. But then yeah, I have to report all of my income still, and I have to report all of my foreign assets still in the States every time I file. So yeah, I think my experience, though, I think compared to the others, has maybe been a little bit more straightforward. So yeah, so I'll hand off to Christy.
yeah, I don't really have that much to add. It's basically the same. I mean, I kept my bank account in the United States, and I have a joint bank account here with my husband. And that's good for me because I work globally. So I have clients in Japan, I have clients in the United States, and I have clients in Europe. So I have like one bank where it's kind of easily linked to collect euros, and I collect dollars in my other account. And for me, the taxes, like I'm such a it's actually quite simple for me. I just say, this is how much revenue I have made in this time period. And and I pay my little part. So for me, like the taxes on the French side are pretty easy. Kara was saying that it's called foreign earned income exclusion. It's like $100,000. So if you're making less than whatever that limit is each year, it probably changes. I know when I was in Japan, it was like $80,000, and now I think it's 100,000. So if your revenue doesn't go over that foreign earned income exclusion, you don't have to pay taxes, but you are supposed to file your taxes. But I will tell you that I never, all the years I lived in Japan, I did not file any of my taxes. I was young, footloose. Who cares? I knew I didn't have to pay anything. And I got kind of freaked out after 3 years of not filing my taxes. And I called some tax office actually at the government. And I was like, oh, I haven't filed my taxes. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. Just file it now. He's like, the only penalty would be is if I was supposed to pay something and I hadn't paid something, then there would be a fine. But I knew I didn't have to pay anything, so there wasn't ever any problem. And now I don't, for me, it's basically pretty simple. So that's it.
Okay, next is Sally.
Let's see, setting up bank accounts here is difficult because everything's really tied to your bank account. So you get a debit card with your bank account, and that debit card makes it so you really don't need a credit card because they don't really believe in credit in Holland. So everything's debit. Now, I kept bank accounts. I have bank accounts in the United States, and I transfer money from the United States to my accounts here. And I haven't transferred anything from here or there. And it's pretty straightforward. The main thing is once you get over a $10,000 transfer, then you trigger all the terrorism acts. There's a lot of the banking is tied to them trying to make sure you're not money laundering and you're not a terrorist. And it's why opening a business account in Holland is almost impossible because they're so afraid of money laundering and terrorism. But every country, once again, is different. So in Italy, where I also have an Italian bank account, which was also difficult to open, they have such problems with people trying to not pay employment taxes that there's a VAT tax on everything. So there's like a 23% VAT tax on employment in Italy. So if I hire a stonemason and I have to pay him $1,000, I end up having to pay him $1,230 because of taxes. So the Italian government, to make sure that we're not paying cash, has made it that with your Italian bank account, no matter how much you've got in the bank, you cannot withdraw more than 2,500 euros a month, period.
Isn't that amazing?
So, and you have to go in to the bank and pay your bills. That if it's not on auto pay, which you have to set up with the bank in person, for like your electrical bills and things like that. If you get a bill from a person who's worked for you, you literally have to go into the bank and have them make the bank transfer. And this way they're able to track how much everybody's getting paid and who's doing what. So once again, it comes down to country by country. It's all navigable. You want to maintain an account in the United States. You want to, yeah, I think something else that I didn't realize till I moved here was that you also, along with federal taxes, you have to have a state. You have to be a citizen of a state, and you have to file state taxes. So you want to pick your state. And, you know, to maintain, you can't just be a citizen of the United States without having a state. So you have to kind of keep up on all of these little funny rules and regulations, and it all works out.
Great.
And don't forget to register to vote as well.
Oh
when
yeah,
you're
but you
registered
can
in your state.
register
That's
overseas,
related to
but-
that too.
Yeah, but it's by
Yeah.
states. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, if I'd thought ahead, I probably would have gone to Delaware or Nevada and set up, because their taxes are so low.
Yeah,
But-
I'm a resident of Nevada. Well, for tax reasons, I'm a resident of Nevada because that was my last address in the US. So I don't have to deal with the state,
Lucky you.
at least state taxes. Yeah, I just have
Yeah.
to file federal
Yeah.
taxes every year. But yeah, I don't really have too much to add. I mentioned a little earlier about how getting credit was difficult. And again, it's almost like just starting from scratch with credit. So, you know, the recommendations I would have is get small, like store cards, and, you know, you'll get a 500-pound limit at first, and you're just building up your credit over time to have your footprint here in the UK. I also have kept my US bank account, and I will say something that I find it's actually sometimes really difficult dealing with US institutions from over here, because like your PIN number will change, and then I try to call in, and because I'm calling from a foreign country, it's like difficult to impossible to get in touch with someone. I can't make a direct debit from my UK bank account to a US bill because the banking systems are just different over here. So, you know, I actually use PayPal to move money back and forth because it's just easier. It's a digital way for me to be able to move a couple $100s to pay something in the States for when I travel, and I want to just use that card. So I personally have found it very difficult. I'm actually, I think, locked out of my Bank of America account right now. I need to call them because they haven't heard from me in such a long time. So just keep that in mind, that sometimes dealing with American banks while you're here can still be a little bit of a challenge. And then the only other thing I was going to mention is about the taxes. So, you know, probably like a lot of others, we do have quite a high tax system. I pay 40% tax on my income, but it is a tiered system. So you're not actually paying 40%, you're paying up to 12,000 pounds a year, I think it's tax free. And between 12,000 and 40,000, I think you pay 20% tax, and then from that amount up. So it sounds a little scary when you think, oh my gosh, I'm paying 40% tax, but it's not actually 40% on my entire wage. It's only on a certain tiered part of it. So,
You know, another thing, and you're talking that I think should be mentioned too, is like when you're dealing with anything in the United States, it's almost here, it's impossible to find a notary. They don't have notaries. So if you're selling something in the United States and it needs to be a notarized document, good luck. There aren't notaries.
We have in France, there are notaries.
Yeah, in Germany as well. So I guess it's kind of one of those things where it's just to get to know the country and do your research. Yeah.
Well, and then another thing too is like to get your visa over here, your residency, you needed to have your birth certificate, but the birth certificate had to have a special certification to it, stamped to it. So
Yep.
just showing your birth certificate is not enough. There's a term for it.
Hopefully
Yeah,
my-
it's the
Apostille.
apostille, exactly. I had to do that last year when for getting married. And my poor mom had to call, I don't know, 4 different offices.
My mom also did it.
To figure. Yeah.
And so before you come here, you need to get that, because getting it from here is impossible, basically.
Good tip.
Yeah.
Hopefully we haven't scared everyone off of the part. But do you all have a sense for whether it's more expensive to live abroad where you're living than it would be in the States, or do you feel like it averages out? Or
I think it's less expensive for me. I think we could buy a house. It's less expensive here. Daycare, which we did use a little bit, was based on they looked at our income. So I got fantastic daycare for very little. Groceries in France. I say to my friends in the United States, it's like the emotional, like in the United States, everybody wants their gas to be cheap. But food, I think, is more expensive. Whereas here it's like the flip, like here gas is expensive and nobody cares. But if milk gets expensive, they are going to protest. So in France, the groceries are all like, you can buy groceries reasonably. When I go to the United States, I'm like, how much is a thing of milk? Like, my God. So I feel in general, like for us, we don't have very much money. We're in the countryside. We live simply, and we are able to get by on very little, actually.
Yeah, I would agree. I think at some point I actually did kind of an equivalent calculation of, okay, if I had my same salary in the States, what would be my like take home pay, what that difference was. And I think the paychecks themselves would be bigger in the States, but then you would then on top have to pay health insurance on top of that. And like you have these other bills where for me in Germany, everything just gets taken out basically automatically. So I have a lot of things that I think are that kind of come on top that you might be paying kind of extra in the States, which for me are kind of part of my automatic, like it just gets deducted before I even see the paycheck. And so I think in the end for me it's probably the same, probably evening out a little bit. But then I also think about a little bit what Christy was saying, that there's also some kind of quality of life questions as well in the mix there, that it's maybe not about exactly how much income you would have in one place versus another, but also some of the benefits that you get, and some things for me in Germany that I love, that I think Alicia mentioned how many vacation days you get. So I have 7 weeks of vacation with my job, not including all of the national holidays that Germany has, which are relatively substantial as well. And then when in a few years I decide to have a baby, I'll be able to be on maternity leave for 3 years, and my company will have to hold a position for me that I can go back to. And so I think for me, it's not only about kind of cost of living and income differences, but it's also, it's about those kind of quality of life questions. And there's not a right answer, but it's kind of what's right for you. And so that's how I think about it.
I don't know if anybody else wanted to weigh in. If not, we can get to the stuff.
Well, I'd say that, I'm living in a major metropolitan city in Amsterdam. It's like one of the hubs of Europe. And the quality of life here is absolutely fantastic. I mean, people are healthy, they're happy, we're bike riding, we've got these incredible canals, the food markets are everywhere all the time. It's flowers, people say, well, why did you move to Amsterdam? Well, a culture that's built on chocolate, cheese, and flowers. I mean, and riding bikes everywhere. It's great. So as far as, and then in Italy, the lifestyle there is even better. I mean, it's just remarkable. And it's less expensive than living in the United States. You're not as much of a consumer. Your money goes for food, and the food is less expensive, and the quality of the food is vastly better because it's not major agribusiness messed with food. It's real food. So it's wonderful.
And the public transportation is so much better over here.
Oh,
We
yeah.
have excellent public transportation. Another thing that I don't want to, I know we're nearly out of time, but I'm happy to follow up, and maybe Christy, you are as well. If people do have questions, you can contact me later. But I found the schooling system over here completely confusing because I didn't go to school here. So it's different. The levels are different. They take tests at certain times, and it's all very different. So I'm happy if anybody has any specific questions, feel free to connect offline later. I'm sure Christy has the same experience in France. It's just a totally different system. So
I don't think I actually said I have a 14-year-old son. I think when I did my introduction, I sort of left that out. So yeah, I've had a baby, did the daycare, elementary school. He's now in junior high school. Yeah, it's fun.
my kids ask me like, Mom, what should I do for this year 9 assessment? I'm like, ask your dad. I have absolutely no idea how the schools work over here. So
Yeah.
Well, if anyone wants to contact me, they're welcome to, but I can't help you as far as schooling. I know nothing about it.
Yeah, I would say same for me as well. Haslet, I'll send you my info as well so that can be shared too.
Great. Yeah, and I put some info in the chat, and then I'll send out an email after the event that has everyone's, whatever they want to share. So let's talk about, we just heard a little bit from Sally about how you chose the Netherlands. So let's do languages first. For those of you, so not Alicia, but those of you who are in countries that speak other languages, could you talk about how much you knew beforehand and how you've managed to learn it if you have, and what, all of that. And I don't know who starts.
Well, I'll never know how to speak Dutch. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible, but fortunately, just about everybody here speaks English. And then in Italy, nobody speaks English because the Italians really have no desire to ever leave Italy. Maybe they speak it in the big cities where they have to deal with tourists, but like in Cortona, nobody speaks. And I don't speak Italian, but there's this wonderful thing called Google Translate. And it's amazing how you can sit there and you can carry on whole conversations between body language and Google Translate, and it all gets done. If you need to communicate with somebody, you can.
That makes me so envious when I think back to, so I studied Japanese at the University of Kansas, and I went to Japan. So I did speak Japanese, and I went and lived in Japan for 4 years. But at that time, there was really not technology. Like I had a dictionary. At one point, I got this little like dorky electronic dictionary where you bleep, bleep, bleep. And then it would there was like this little like line. It was like trying to like, but yeah, so yeah, that was tough. So I went to Japan. I spoke Japanese when I lived in Japan. Coming to France, no, I did not speak French. It's ridiculous. I realize there's so many people out there that probably studied French at high school and studied French and are dreaming of going to France. I ended up here kind of by accident because a friend of mine married an architect here. And so I went to their wedding. And I was like just having fun at the wedding, and I saw this hunky guy. Did not take him seriously at all. He's now in the next room. He's my husband. So you just never know. You just got to keep your eyes open. I mean, I do think that not everybody would have chosen this path. Like I was open to it. Like I took that step and fell in love and got married, and I don't regret it most of the time. But I did not speak French when I came here. In fact, I was like learning. I had like a Pimsleur CD in my ears, like on the plane here coming to visit, and I could say, "Où est la rue Saint-Jacques, s'il vous plaît? C'est là-bas." And still, it makes people laugh because I'll dish out that one line that I could say for like the first few months I was here. And I don't know how I learned French. I do not know. I think it has something to do with being tired and watching TV and having a baby. It somehow worked into my brain. I speak French very much like a local country kind of person. And I was once with some more formal French people, and I said something, and they're like, "Oh, no, Christy. That is how like rough men speak." And I was like, yep, that's who I spend time with. So I'm better now. I now know the words. I now know more if I'm being impolite, so I can dish it out on purpose instead of by accident. But yeah, I showed up here and just had to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I studied German in college, as I mentioned at the beginning. So I knew the language before I came over. It was my minor in college, and I had also taken a test, like a certification test, before coming over as well. So yeah, I already had a really good base before I came over here, but it has gotten so much better and so much richer since then. And I think my advice would be to learn at least a few basics if you can, just because I think, in my experience with also some of my friends, so I have a lot of other expat friends from America or from Canada who are also native English speakers, and we were all trying to do everything ourselves. So of course, if you have an immigration lawyer, I think that language barrier will not really exist. But because we always tried to apply it for everything on our own and be our own advocate in the office for the visas. I did notice that, talking to my friends, my experiences were sometimes different than theirs and less complicated maybe than theirs because of the language. And I also noticed a little bit the way that I think somebody mentioned before, like they don't have a sense of humor when it comes to the visa paperwork. And I think that's also, I noticed that kind of along those lines that I got treated a little bit differently because I could speak the language. Then I noticed some people, even in the same office, 2 desks right next to each other, and there was another group of people next to me or another person next to me from a different place who maybe couldn't speak German, and I could feel them getting treated very differently than I was. So it's not to scare anybody, but I think there is definitely value in learning at least some basics, for sure. And I think it also helps to integrate a bit and to also feel like you're integrating yourself, even if, because I remember Germans are always like, oh my gosh, you can speak German? Like our language is hard and terrible sounding. Like, what? That's amazing that you can do that. And even if you're pronouncing everything terribly and forgetting words, I think the effort is really appreciated in my experience. So, yeah.
Great. We've got 2 questions that are just for Alicia, if you want to take some after that. So one of them is, did Brexit affect your citizenship at all? And then the other one is about, someone's wondering about considerations for families with elementary school age children. That sounds like you maybe, and then also maybe Christy. Yeah.
Brexit, we don't even have a clue what's going on, let alone all the rest of the EU, right? So yeah, I'm a British citizen, so my British citizenship status has not changed at all, but that unfortunately now does mean that we're not a part of the EU, so I wouldn't be able to just pick up and move to Germany next week if I wanted to. In the future, I don't know how it's all going to get worked out. Again, because of COVID coming, I think everything just kind of happened at once. And so even as citizens here, we don't really know a lot about what's going on in the future. And then, yeah, my children, well, I have 13-year-old triplets. So I have 3 13-year-olds that were 4 years old when we moved here. So yeah, I'm happy to talk about their experience in elementary school, and they're now in high school over here. So yeah, feel free to give me a shout offline. I'm happy to chat about any of those experiences. So, and yes, 3 kids. I moved over here with 3 4-year-olds.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds amazing. Okay, well, we only have a few minutes left, so let's round it out by talking about, for some of you, you married a person and that seems like how you chose your country. And then for others, that wasn't the case. So let's just end it by saying, what would you recommend to people who are thinking about moving abroad in terms of where they go? Should they visit a place for a long time before they go? I don't know. What do you think? And then also, you know, Sally and Kara, maybe Kara, how did you come to, you know, minor in German? And then Sally, how did you end up choosing the Netherlands? And I don't know who we should start with. Someone could volunteer.
I'll just say I had been to England one time before I moved here. So I think everybody's different, you know, either you go or you don't go, you know. I think, like Christy said, just having an open mind. Yeah. And I nearly cried the first time I went in the grocery store because everything was different, and the prices, and don't even get me started on the metric system, and the brands were different and everything. Yeah. You have to just not think that way anymore when you're here. Just embrace where you are and learn the funny little quirky things about your culture, and just go with it.
Yeah,
I came to Amsterdam on a regular basis for many years and just knew that I considered it to be the most fun spot in the whole universe. And that
now I want to come there.
Oh, it's just perfect. It really is perfect. I mean, we talked a lot about the hurdles, you know, and bureaucracy is there to provide hurdles. They're there to set things up because they don't want the whole world to be here on the doorstep. But once you go over all the hurdles and you clear them and get over it, the lifestyle here is absolutely tremendous. I think every person has a different path in life, and we all have different passions and things that really speak to us, and that you have to listen to yourself and understand what challenges you're ready to take on and which challenges you really want to avoid. And doing some research and preparing yourself mentally and knowing that there's going to be certain hurdles makes it easier to get through them, because you don't want to get so tired and worn out that you're doubting your choice. You want to be able to embrace your choice. I have not looked back. I mean, I got here and 3 days later, the world shut down, and I was completely alone in a rental Airbnb apartment because my place wasn't done and I didn't have any of my furniture. I had one suitcase of clothes, and I was there from March until May until my stuff arrived. And I was just bicycling around through empty, deserted streets with cooking and doing my own thing and loving every single minute of it, feeling very fortunate.
Nice.
So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would definitely agree. You know, everybody's going to have different, a different path in life. And I think for me, the decision to move to Germany, I mean, Germany in particular, for me, was inspired by a high school exchange program. And then that made me want to learn German. And I went to college thinking like, I'll take a German class, and I had no expectations, but just wanted to, and then turned it into a course of study, and then studied abroad, and that still wasn't enough. And I remember coming off the airplane after getting back from study abroad, and my mom was so excited to see me, gave me a big hug, and I was like, okay, but I want to go back. And I was just immediately planning, okay, once I graduate, I'm going back, and I'm moving there, and figuring out a way to make that happen. And I think and for me, there was something about Germany that felt like home, which sounds super weird because before that exchange program, I had never been there before. But I just went there, and I don't know, there was just something about it where I thought like I could see myself living here. I really like this, and it just had this home feeling, even though it was very different. And it was just a really interesting experience to be in a place that's very different from everything I knew, but somehow it still felt like home for me. And I think that was, you know, having that feeling and kind of finding what it is about a certain place, whatever place that is, that that gives you that feeling and gives you that motivation to be resilient no matter what. Like Sally was saying, bureaucracy is there to put hurdles in your path, and that's never going to change no matter where you are in the world. But you know, having the motivation to get through those hurdles and figuring out ways around them. I think that's, yeah, Germany kind of always had that for me. And I just, yeah, and I've been here for 9 years now and still love it and can see myself staying here for a really long time. And it's not always easy. I mean, I definitely relate to what Alicia said about being in the grocery store and being like, what have I done? Like everything's different here. And I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that every moment is going to be this dream that maybe you think of and have in mind. But in the end, if it's the right thing, there's always going to be that feeling that you just know. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I think I will try, since we're going to wrap up. I was just thinking, what would I want to share? And I realized we've been being really practical. There's been a lot of practical discussion here, and we haven't really talked about the lovey global traveling adventure, like reasons why. Like I've gone all over the world. I've done a lot of traveling. So for me, being open to the idea of living abroad, that I don't think it surprised anybody that I knew, or who knew me. But I actually want to throw out there are things that I would now, I look back, I'm like, I did not really take into consideration what it meant to be living on another continent from friends and family. So everybody out there in Lawrence, Kansas, you know, I miss you. Like I really miss Lawrence, Kansas, and that energy, because you do not get that fun energy. There's not yellow sub in France, all right? Sandwiches here, or no, food may be great, but there's no yellow sub. There's no Mexican food. Hello, you have to make it yourself. I make my own pizza, right? Like there's a lot of stuff here, but that's not what I want to talk about. This pandemic this past year has highlighted the fact that I am way over here, far away from my mom, who had her 80th birthday. And I'm lucky because my mom, who I love dearly, has enough money to fly. She travels she's also a traveler, so she can come here and visit us. If we sometimes fly back, or sometimes she'll buy our tickets to fly back so that we can see each other. So my situation has been made a lot easier because my mom makes sure that we see each other, right? I feel like now my home base, because it's my husband, my son, my house, I can put my roots in here. And it's just something to consider if you have kids. It's not just you. Like the grandparent is on the other side of the planet. And I think of some families where if my mom were not a traveler, or if she didn't have that money, this would have been really much harder. And now with the pandemic situation, like my mom wants me to come back and visit, but I'm like, I don't know, if I come back, am I gonna have trouble getting back into France? Like this, like that, and that's a temporary, like let's but still things to consider. It's not just the dreamy, lovey global adventure. I think, and people who are asking about kids, I'm happy to talk offline about education and also homeschooling kind of options. I did that this year with my son. But yeah, I mean, that I honestly, if I didn't really consider that. I mean, of course, I thought about it on a superficial level before moving here, but I didn't really think about being on another continent from extended family. So think about those things. Think about your bigger picture and how sad grandma's going to be if she doesn't get to see the baby when it's born, or things like that. But anyway, I just wanted to throw out that for consideration.
Yeah. Yeah, and we had a question too about what's the thing you miss the most about the US living abroad, and it sounds like, yeah, like being far away from family who are still US based.
No, it's Mexican food.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's definitely food. That's what technology's for. We have Zoom and all this stuff, but I can't Zoom. Yeah, Mexican food.
Yeah, Mexican food.
Yeah. Can't Zoom a burrito. Or for me, also peanut butter. They have peanut butter in Germany, but it is not the same. It's not the same.
All right.
I've learned how to cook. So I now, and Sally,
Yeah.
Sally, you're a foodie, but so I never intended to be a housewife, or clearly not a farmy housewife. I never thought that I was going to be like, if I wanted pizza, I now make my crust, I make my sauce, I make my own Italian sausage, I make it all. So I'm like that gal in the kitchen making.
Well, I hope you all go on and see my food blog. It's under just cook with Sally, all one word.
Okay.
But I second everybody else saying, the biggest problem is that you are on another continent, and seeing your close family and friends is a real effort, especially, I moved here and it's been COVID, so I haven't seen anybody since I moved here. None of us have seen, Americans haven't been allowed here, so we haven't seen anybody.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we've reached the end. Thank you so much to everybody for hanging in there with us through 2 hours. I think we got through so much practical info. I've shared contact details in the chat. I'll also send an email. Anyone who wants to connect, panelists or attendees, just let me know. I wanted to let all the attendees know I also have a recorded interview with some folks in Australia and New Zealand. That's going to go up on the library YouTube pretty soon, so you can watch that for tips for the Southern Hemisphere, since this was our Europe edition. Okay, and I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. It was wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was really
thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Thanks.
And thanks,
Alright.
Hazlet, for putting it all together and managing
Yes.
it so
Yeah.
nicely and getting all the
Thank you
questions.
very much.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure thing.